Section 10 of The Interpretation of Dreams. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Matthew Westra. The Interpretation of Dreams by Sigmund Freud, translated by A. Brill. Section 10. The Method of Dream Interpretation. The epigraph on the title page of this volume indicates the tradition to which I prefer to ally myself in the conception of the dream. I am proposing to show that dreams are capable of interpretation, and any contributions to the solution of the problems which have already been discussed will emerge only as possible byproducts in the accomplishment of my special task. On the hypothesis that dreams are susceptible of interpretation, I at once find myself in disagreement with the prevailing doctrine of dreams. In fact, with all the theories of dreams, excepting only that of Scherner. For to interpret a dream is to specify its meaning, to replace it by something which takes its position in the concatenation of our psychic activities as a link of definite importance and value. But as we have seen, the scientific theories of the dream leave no room for a problem of dream interpretation, since, in the first place, according to these theories, dreaming is not a psychic activity at all, but a somatic process which makes itself known to the psychic apparatus by means of symbols. Lay opinion has always been opposed to these theories. It asserts its privilege of proceeding logically, and although it admits that dreams are incomprehensible and absurd, it cannot summon up the courage to deny that dreams have any significance. Led by a dim intuition, it seems rather to assume that dreams have a meaning, albeit a hidden one, that they are intended as a substitute for some other thought process, and that we have only to disclose this substitute correctly in order to discover the hidden meaning of the dream. The unscientific world, therefore, has always endeavored to interpret dreams, and by applying one or the other of two essential different methods. The first of these methods envisages the dream content as a whole, and seeks to replace it by another content which is intelligible and in certain respects analogous. This is symbolic dream interpretation, and of course it goes to pieces at the very outset in the case of those dreams which are not only unintelligible but confused. The construction which the biblical Joseph placed upon the dream of Pharaoh furnishes an example of this method. The 7 fat kine, after which came 7 lean ones that devoured the former, were a symbolic substitute for 7 years of famine in the land of Egypt, which according to the prediction were to consume all the surplus that 7 fruitful years had produced. Much of the artificial dreams contrived by the poets are intended for some such symbolic interpretation, for they reproduce the thought conceived by the poet in a guise not unlike the disguise which we are wont to find in our dreams. A demonstration of the manner in which one arrives at such a symbolic interpretation cannot, of course, be given. Success remains a matter of ingenious conjecture, of direct intuition, and for this reason dream interpretation has naturally been elevated into an art which seems to depend upon extraordinary gifts. Aristotle expressed himself in this connection by saying that the best interpreter of dreams is he who can best grasp similarities. For dream pictures, like pictures in water, are disfigured by the motion of the water, so that he hits the target best who is able to recognize the true picture in the distorted one. The second of the two popular methods of dream interpretation entirely abandons such claims. It might be described as the cipher method, since it treats the dream as a kind of secret code in which every sign is translated into another sign of known meaning, according to an established key. For example, I've dreamt of a letter, and also of a funeral or the like. I consult a dream book, and I find that letter is to be translated by vexation, and funeral by engagement. It now remains to establish a connection, which I am again to assume as pertaining to the future, by means of the rigmarole which I have deciphered. An interesting variant of this cipher procedure a variant in which its character of purely mechanical transference is to a certain extent corrected, is presented in the work on dream interpretation by Artemidorus of Daldis. Here, not only the dream content, but also the personality and social position of the dreamer are taken into consideration, so that the same dream content has a significance for the rich man, the married man, or the orator, which is different from that which applies to the poor man, the bachelor, or, let us say, the merchant. The essential point, then, in this procedure is that the work of interpretation is not applied to the entirety of the dream, but to each portion of the dream content severally, as though the dream were a conglomerate in which each fragment calls for special treatment. Incoherent and confused dreams are certainly those that have been responsible for the invention of the cipher method. The worthlessness of both these popular methods of interpretation does not admit of discussion. As regards the scientific treatment of the subject, the symbolic method is limited in its application and is not susceptible of a general exposition. In the cipher method, everything depends upon whether the key, the dream book, is reliable, and for that all guarantees are lacking, so that one might be tempted to grant the contention of the philosophers and psychiatrists and to dismiss the problem of dream interpretation as altogether fanciful. After the completion of my manuscript, a paper by Stumpf came to my notice, which agrees with my work in attempting to prove that the dream is full of meaning and capable of interpretation. But the interpretation is undertaken by means of an allegorizing symbolism, and there is no guarantee that the procedure is generally applicable. I have, however, come to think differently. I have been forced to perceive that here, once more, we have one of those not infrequent cases where an ancient and stubbornly retained popular belief seems to have come nearer to the truth of the matter than the opinion of modern science. I must insist that the dream actually does possess a meaning, and that a scientific method of dream interpretation is possible. I've arrived at my knowledge of this method in the following manner. For years, I have been occupied with the resolution of certain psychopathological structures, hysterical phobias, obsessional ideas, and the like, with therapeutic intentions. I've been so occupied, in fact, that ever since I heard the significant statement of Joseph Breuer to the effect that in these structures regarded as morbid symptoms, solution and treatment go hand in hand. Where it has been possible to trace a pathological idea back to those elements in the psychic life of the patient to which it owed its origin, this idea has crumbled away and the patient has been relieved of it. In view of the failure of our other therapeutic efforts, and in the face of the mysterious character of these pathological conditions, it seemed to me tempting, in spite of all the difficulties, to follow the method initiated by Breuer until a complete elucidation of the subject had been achieved. I shall have occasion elsewhere to give a detailed account of the form which the technique of this procedure has finally assumed, and of the results of my efforts. In the course of these psychoanalytic studies, I happened upon the question of dream interpretation. My patients, after I had pledged them to inform me of all the ideas and thoughts which occurred to them in connection with a given theme, related their dreams, and thus taught me that a dream may be interpolated in the psychic concatenation, which may be followed backwards from a pathological idea into the patient's memory. The next step was to treat the dream itself as a symptom, and to apply to it the method of interpretation which had been worked out for such symptoms. For this, a certain psychic preparation on the part of the patient is necessary. A twofold effort is made to stimulate his attentiveness in respect of his psychic perceptions and to eliminate the critical spirit in which he is ordinarily in the habit of viewing such thoughts as come to the surface. For the purpose of self-observation with concentrated attention, it is advantageous that the patient should take up a restful position and close his eyes. He must be explicitly instructed to renounce all criticism of the thought formations which he may perceive. He must also be told that the success of the psychoanalysis depends upon his noting and communicating everything that passes through his mind, and that he must not allow himself to suppress one idea because it seems to him unimportant or irrelevant to the subject, or another because it seems nonsensical. He must preserve an absolute impartiality in respect to his ideas, for if he is unsuccessful in finding the desired solution of the dream, the obsessional idea, or the like, it will be because he permits himself to be critical of them. I've noticed in the course of my psychoanalytic work that the psychological state of a man in an attitude of reflection is entirely different from that of a man who is observing his psychic processes. In reflection, there is a greater play of psychic activity than in the most attentive self-observation. This is shown even by the tense attitude and the wrinkled brow of the man in a state of reflection, as opposed to the mimic tranquility of the man observing himself. In both cases, there must be concentrated attention, but the reflective man makes use of his critical faculties, with the result that he rejects some of the thoughts which rise into consciousness after he has become aware of them, and abruptly interrupts others, so that he does not follow the lines of thought which they would otherwise open up for him, while in respect of yet other thoughts he is able to behave in such a manner that they do not become conscious at all, that is to say, they are suppressed before they are perceived. In self-observation, on the other hand, he has but one task, that of suppressing criticism. If he succeeds in doing this, an unlimited number of thoughts enter his consciousness which would otherwise have eluded his grasp. With the aid of the material thus obtained, material which is new to the self-observer, it is possible to achieve the interpretation of pathological ideas, and also that of dream formations. As will be seen, the point is to induce a psychic state which is in some degree analogous as regards the distribution of psychic energy, mobile attention, to the state of the mind before falling asleep, and also, of course, to the hypnotic state. On falling asleep, the undesired ideas emerge, owing to the slackening of a certain arbitrary and, of course, also critical action, which is allowed to influence the trend of our ideas. We are accustomed to speak of fatigue as the reason of this slackening. The emerging undesired ideas are changed into visual and auditory images in the condition which it utilized for the analysis of dreams and pathological ideas. This activity is purposely and deliberately renounced, and the psychic energy thus saved, or some part of it, is employed in attentively tracking the undesired thoughts which now come to the surface, thoughts which retain their identity as ideas, in which the condition differs from the state of falling asleep. Undesired ideas are thus changed into desired ones. There are many people who do not seem to find it easy to adopt the required attitude toward the apparently free-rising ideas, and to renounce the criticism which is otherwise applied to them. The undesired ideas habitually evoke the most violent resistance, which seems to prevent them from coming to the surface. But if we may credit our great poet-philosopher Friedrich Schiller, the essential condition of poetical creation includes a very similar attitude. In a certain passage in his correspondence with Körner, for the tracing of which we are indebted to Otto Rank, Schiller replies in the following words to a friend who complains of his lack of creative power. The reason for your complaint lies, it seems to me, in the constraint which your intellect imposes upon your imagination. Here I will make an observation, and illustrate it by an allegory. Apparently, it is not good, and indeed it hinders the creative work of the mind if the intellect examines too closely the ideas already pouring in, as it were, at the gates. Regarded in isolation, an idea may be quite insignificant, and venturesome in the extreme, but it may acquire importance from an idea which follows it. Perhaps in a certain collocation with other ideas, which may seem equally absurd, it may be capable of furnishing a very serviceable link. The intellect cannot judge all these ideas unless it can retain them until it has considered them in connection with these other ideas. In the case of a creative mind, it seems to me the intellect has withdrawn its watchers from the gates, and the ideas rush in pell-mell, and only then does it review and inspect the multitude. You worthy critics, or whatever you may call yourselves, are ashamed or afraid of the momentary and passing madness which is found in all real creators, the longer or shorter duration of which distinguishes the thinking artist from the dreamer. Hence your complaints of unfruitfulness, for you reject too soon and discriminate too severely. And yet, such a withdrawal of the watchers from the gates of the intellect, as Schiller puts it, such a translation into the condition of uncritical self-observation is by no means difficult. Most of my patients accomplish it after my first instructions. I myself can do so very completely if I assist the process by writing down the ideas that flash through my mind. The quantum of psychic energy, by which the critical activity is thus reduced, and by which the intensity of self-observation may be increased, varies considerably according to the subject matter upon which the attention is to be fixed. The first step in the application of this procedure teaches us that one cannot make the dream as a whole the object of one's attention, but only the individual components of its content. If I ask a patient who is as yet unpracticed, "What occurs to you in connection with this dream?" he is unable, as a rule, to fix upon anything in his psychic field of vision. I must first dissect the dream for him. Then, in connection with each fragment, he gives me a number of ideas which may be described as the thoughts behind this part of the dream. In this first and important condition, then, the method of dream interpretation which I employ diverges from the popular, historical, and legendary method of interpretation by symbolism, and approaches more nearly to the second, or cipher method. Like this, it is an interpretation in detail, not en masse. Like this, it conceives the dream from the outset as something built up, as a conglomerate of psychic formations. In the course of my psychoanalysis of neurotics, I've already subjected perhaps more than 1,000 dreams to interpretation, but I do not wish to use this material now as an introduction to the theory and technique of dream interpretation, for quite apart from the fact that I should lay myself open to the objection that these are the dreams of neuropaths, so that the conclusions drawn from them would not apply to the dreams of healthy persons, there is another reason that impels me to reject them. The theme to which these dreams point is, of course, always the history of the malady that is responsible for the neurosis. Hence, every dream would require a very long introduction and an investigation of the nature and the etiological conditions of the psychoneuroses, matters which are in themselves novel and exceedingly strange, and which would therefore distract attention from the dream problem proper. My purpose is rather to prepare the way, by the solution of the dream problem, for the solution of the more difficult problems of the psychology of the neuroses. But if I eliminate the dreams of neurotics, which constitute my principal material, I cannot be too fastidious in my treatment of the rest. Only those dreams are left which have been incidentally related to me by healthy persons of my acquaintance, or which I find given as examples in the literature of dream life. Unfortunately, in all these dreams I am deprived of the analysis without which I cannot find the meaning of the dream. My mode of procedure is, of course, less easy than that of the popular cipher method, which translates the given dream content by reference to an established key. I, on the contrary, hold that the same dream content may conceal a different meaning in the case of different persons, or in different connections. I must therefore resort to my own dreams as a source of abundant and convenient material, furnished by a person who is more or less normal, and containing references to many incidents of everyday life. I shall certainly be confronted with doubts as to the trustworthiness of these self-analyses, and it will be said that arbitrariness is by no means excluded in such analyses. In my own judgment, conditions are more likely to be favorable in self-observation than in the observations of others. In any case, it is permissible to investigate how much can be accomplished in the matter of dream interpretation by means of self-analysis. There are other difficulties which must be overcome in my own inner self. One has a comprehensible aversion to exposing so many intimate details of one's own psychic life, and one does not feel secure against the misinterpretations of strangers. But one must be able to transcend such considerations. Tout psychologiste, writes Delboeuf, every psychologist is obliged to admit even his own weaknesses, if he thinks by that he may throw his light on a difficult problem. And I may assume for the reader that his initial interest in the indiscretions which I must commit will very soon give way to an exclusive engrossment in the psychological problems elucidated by them. I shall therefore select one of my own dreams for the purpose of elucidating my method of interpretation. Every such dream necessitates a preliminary statement, so that I must now beg the reader to make my interests his own for a time, and to become absorbed with me in the most trifling details of my life. For an interest in the hidden significance of dreams imperatively demands just such a transference. End of recording. End of section 10. Recording by Matthew Westra for Librivox.